So Hannah, me and my wife were watching a film the other night, and we, for some reason, started watching Vin Diesel in Fast 10. So he's driving a lot of cars that are pretty much indestructible, and there's this one bit where something explodes, and he drives the car down a dam, and my wife turns to me and goes, "That's the kind of car you want. Look, it's not a mark on it." And it was a moment where I turned and looked and went, I don't know if she's serious or not in this conversation. And she was like, even the wheels are on fire and it's still going. And I thought, she is serious. She wants me to buy Vin Diesel's car. Now, I don't think I can afford Vin Diesel's car, or even if that car exists. But I'm going to go and see if I can get it.
I think I could picture you driving around in a cool car like that.
Thank you. You can come again on this podcast. You're more than welcome.
You'd probably still get it stuck in floodwater.
Hello, welcome to Agonomics. I'm David Udall, and if you had to love me for a reason, then it's because I present this weekly AHDB podcast, concerned with the economics of agriculture, no matter what subject we pick. It's all about food trends this week, and I'm joined by analyst Hannah McLoughlin to discuss a couple of topics. We'll look at how meat and dairy outperformed alternatives at the start of the year, and discover why healthy and convenient meals are on the rise. Apparently, there's nothing more convenient than a sandwich when it comes to lunch. Though we do like to eat Italian food, or pies, or pasties, whatever the hour. If you're new to Agonomics, I won't ask where you've been for the best part of a year. Love you anyway. Just follow and subscribe wherever you stream your podcasts to make sure you don't miss a future episode. A new collection of spoken words, or should I say new shows, drop at midday on Wednesdays. And please get in touch. It's always so good to hear from you. Comment on any of AHDB social channels or send us an email, agonomics@ahdb.org.uk. So as ever, in the world of economics at AHDB, there is always something for us to talk about. And recently, we have been looking at the latest DEFRA data on pig meat production, looking at the first quarter of 2025. And in the first 3 months of this year, the UK has produced 244,500 tonnes of pig meat, which is very specific, but I like it. That's quite a lot, actually. It's about 6.4% above where we were for the same period last year. But it is worth noting that the volumes in 24 were actually the lowest on record since 2017. So even though it looks like we've gone up a lot in terms of pig meat production, that is from a low base. We normally see volumes of production ease through quarter one of a year and quarter four of the year, following that sort of strong demand for the pork category through Christmas. But actually between that fourth quarter into 2024 and the first quarter of 25, there was actually a drop of 5,000 tonnes. So it's interesting, actually, just seeing these sort of change in these statistics. Clean pig slaughter numbers are up 5.5%. And for those of you that are interested, the number that I'm sure you really want to know, carcass weight average, oh, drum roll. Can we get like a fake drum roll in, Martin? 91.5 kilos. There we go. And something else that was released recently, which can be interesting, but I think was maybe a little bit boring this time around, was the US Department of Agriculture World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates. For those that just like acronyms, the USDA WASD. And this is looking at the supply and demand around the world for main crops. And this is looking at the end of the current 24-25 season. And the most interesting thing, from a stocks perspective, the wheat stocks for the end of the season for the world remain the same, about 260 million tonnes. There was a slight reduction for maize stocks, but nothing to really panic about. I think really the focus now from a global supply and demand estimates switches to the next report from the USDA, which is in early May, and that is when they provide the first estimates of the 25-26 global balance sheet. So what we'll be getting from harvest this year and what it means for supply and demand. So I think that will be something that could be, as ever, quite important in setting that longer term trend of global grain volatility, depending on where we go. And yeah, we've had some dry weather recently in the UK, but, and this is where I jinx it because I'm recording this beforehand, so it might not happen. You know how the weather likes to make a fool of you. We are seeing some rain coming through the forecast, so hopefully that will improve crop conditions and give some of those spring crops a little bit of a push in their early growth stages as well. Cooking trends. That is the topic for the first part of our podcast this week. As I said, I'm joined by Hannah McLoughlin, who looks at this world for us in AHDB. And specifically, we're talking about in-home eating habits here, aren't we? Which is the thing. We're talking about what people do in their houses. Nothing weird, nothing odd, just about food. Nothing weird with food. We're just talking about standard cooking here, guys. Nothing else, okay? Anyway, let's start off with talking about the main trends for consumers and changing their eating habits in home. We released some work at the end of March, didn't we? So what was kind of like the main headlines from that piece of work with regards to those changing habits?
Yeah, so the three main trends which evolved are health, convenience, and cuisine based. Since the cost of living crisis has begun to slow, people aren't as cost conscious, so they're willing to spend more money on healthier or more convenient foods. As people return to the office, they have less time available for cooking, so naturally they turn to more convenient meals. Cuisine based is people craving a bit more excitement, wanting to spice it up a bit, so they're moving away from basic meals and looking around at the globe for inspiration instead.
So your meat and two veg, your standard kind of like limp boiled broccoli, that ain't cutting it anymore. People are looking for something that's a bit more interesting and a bit more exciting in their food.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of exciting food, let's take it to the other end of that extreme. Sandwiches. Sandwiches and convenience. Now, this is something that if I'm honest, I don't know whether I'm surprised. Am I slightly disappointed in society that we don't have anything more imaginative than a sandwich? But sandwich is still kind of top of the list for convenience, isn't it?
Yeah, the top meal for lunch is a sandwich with a massive percentage share of occasions compared to the remaining top four. Like I said before, as people return to the office, quick and convenient options are the most popular. At tea time, consumers want to spend less time cooking. Meal preparation time has continued to reduce in the past 5 years to an all-time low of 31 minutes for the evening meal. This has now caused meals to become simpler and include fewer ingredients. The average is now less than 5 ingredients. And I have a very important question for you, David. Do you call it tea or dinner?
Oh, well, I tell you what, you've stumbled on something there because the preschool that my son goes to, dinner's lunch, so you have lunch about 11:30ish kind of thing because of the preschool timings, and then he had his tea at 3. And Alfred recently, we bought him, you get these things called Yoto cards. They're like kind of a little play. They play stories kind of thing for kids. We bought him some, and we bought him Enid Blyton's Famous Five ones. And they have tea, and then they have supper. So I've managed to kind of, I think, raise Alfred's social class to slightly higher because now he has some supper that he likes as well. So through preschool and Enid Blyton, my whole concept of tea and dinner and everything has been thrown out of the whack completely.
Wow. Yeah, that is interesting. I am a diehard calling it tea. Will not have anything else.
I think if I had to choose, I'd go, yeah, it's lunch and what having for tea. Yeah, I think I'll probably say the same. But I've got a question for you now then. And then I want to talk about something you mentioned about 31 minutes of cooking time. This sounds like Ready, Steady, Cook. Where's Ainsley Harriott when you need him? Sandwiches, what would be your favourite sandwich?
This is not going to be an exciting answer, I'm afraid. It has to be a plain cheese sandwich. Nothing else. That has been my go-to since I was a child, and I have not evolved.
Some things just win, though, don't they? Some things just work. One of the best sandwiches I've ever had that first comes to mind, years ago, lived in Australia, went to a place called Convent Bakery, just outside, sort of outskirts of Melbourne. Really lovely. They do a bacon, lettuce, avocado and tomato baguette. Oh, that's a posh sandwich there for you.
Yeah, that does sound posh.
Anyway, let's get back to it. So 31 minutes for cooking, which isn't a lot of time for cooking, is it? And less than about 5 ingredients, did you say?
Yeah, less than 5 ingredients.
That's not a meal at all, is it? I'm trying to think what that would be. How'd you spend 31 minutes with only 5 ingredients? There's only 5 ingredients. What are you doing for the other 27 minutes, basically, is what I'm worrying about. People just faffing around. I think we need to get more adventurous with our cooking. Anyway, look, we're getting off topic there slightly. So, on that basis, 31 minutes, 5 ingredients of cooking, what are the kind of the top cuisines that people are actually cooking with that?
The top 5 options at tea time is where we are also seeing the convenience trend, but another trend that's coming through is cuisine-based meals. So The top option is Italian dishes such as pizza, pasta. They're regarded as firm family favourites. Also, they commonly include cheese, which we've seen increases the enjoyment and taste of a meal, which I completely agree with because I think it's my favourite food. British cuisines also feature in the top 5 with pies and pasties present, which personally I think surprised me quite a bit. Oriental dishes such as stir fry are quite popular, followed by Indian dishes such as a curry. Mexican dishes are a favourite for combining both meat and dairy. Enjoyment is the main factor contributing to the growth of these dishes, but taste, practicality are other considerable factors.
So I'm now going to make a sweeping statement around the state of cooking in this country, that if we're saying that people are spending 31 minutes on average cooking an evening meal, using 5 ingredients, and yet making a curry or a stir fry, I'm just saying people are making bad curries. Because 5 ingredients is basically the spices you put into a curry. What else are they eating? That's just, I'm disappointed with you, society, if that's the way you cook. Disappointed. Anyway, I'm going to move on now, otherwise I think I'm going to start ranting. So we've mentioned sectors here. Let's take this back to sort of agriculture and talk about the sectors that we're covering. So we spoke about sandwiches earlier and how they're kind of like top of the list. Evidently from a flour milling, bread, baking perspective, that's fantastic news because that supports that side of the sector. As you were mentioning there, cheese being popular, supporting the dairy side. But in terms of red meat and pork going into these dishes, what does this all mean for the protein basis?
For both pork and lamb, traditional chop are the most popular choice, whereas beef, the cuisine aspect comes into things, so Italian dishes are the most popular, the top dish being spaghetti bolognese. The other primary categories are very small in comparison to beef, but processed pork, so that would be sausages, bacon, your sliced cooked meats, have over 1 billion meals a year. Roast dinners are the second most popular dish for primary pork and lamb, but it does not feature in the top 5 for beef. Due to the size of the beef category, it has a higher percentage share of occasions than both pork and lamb, so it's actually higher for beef, but it doesn't feature in the top 5. So my question for you is, what is your favourite roast dinner meat?
Oh, that's a good one. If I had to choose pork belly, I'd go for would always be my choice, I'd say.
I think that's a bit of a rogue one.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I think pork or chicken would be up there, but no, mainly pork, I think.
Well, you mentioned chicken. That's a very good segue, unintended segue, and I'll take it when it's there. Because I was going to say, obviously, in terms of flexibility of meals, this all comes down to sort of price competitiveness between proteins, and we have seen chicken from a price competition basis and also a flexibility basis in that it can be used in the majority of dishes that you just said about. You can do it as a roast, you can do it as a curry, you can do it within Italian dishes, you can do it within Asian dishes, you can do it in pretty much anything. Chicken is a flexible meat and cheaper, and therefore is, directly a very, very strong competitor to the red meats. And that's something that, from a sector perspective, I think is one thing which is potentially a risk, again, when it comes to prices. And people, like you say, whilst they may be less conscious of price points of meat, it is still something that is very important. And also, as you mentioned, from a mince perspective, like sort of spaghetti bolognese, that flexibility, people moving to those kind of things to be able to do something quickly, but also have lots of options with them. It then comes back to the carcass balance issue for cows and sheep to an extent, but mainly from a cow perspective. But actually, are people using the lean meat cuts in these dishes versus using something such as mince because of its flexibility? And therefore, if we're using more mince, it means that we have to then export other cuts of meat, which brings the exporting carcass balance into the equation. So, actually what we're saying really is the dishes that people demand, again, from a consumer's perspective, whilst we're having a bit of fun with it, this is the demand part of the supply and demand economics of the raw material and predominantly the protein meats that our farmers are creating. So it is important to look at how people's food habits and cooking habits are changing over time, because that is what is driving the demand in your market, and not having kind of a fight with my internal economist monologue, but there would be a significant proportion of economists who would say you should always start with your demand when looking at a market. understand what your demand is, and then supply to that. So from a farmer perspective, obviously, while you can't just supply mince, you still have to make the whole cow. It does obviously drive the value of the cow and therefore has a direct impact on them. So it is very interesting. Anyway, before we wrap up and go into a break, and one thing we've spoken is health as well. We've mentioned a couple of times. I mean, we spoke about it with Charlotte a few episodes ago with regards to sort of Gen Z, Gen Z, and their perspective of health. So we do know that it's very important for consumer choices, isn't it?
Yes, health is becoming more important for consumers and influencing what meals they cook quite heavily. Salad and stew/casserole are examples of meals which are picked for health reasons, which personally I do not think would be my go-to choices. The consumption of meat and dairy alternatives are in decline as consumers are turning to meals which include more meat and dairy for their enjoyment, practicality, and natural health benefits. A trend that we've seen coming through is people turning away from ultra-processed foods. I know I've seen a lot of this on social media, and people are wanting more natural, healthy foods rather than ultra-processed foods.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, I just can't get roast dinners out of my head now. That's all I'm thinking about. Anyway, right. In the short break, I'm going to go and cook a roast dinner and see if I can do it with 5 ingredients in 31 minutes. That's a challenge. When we come back, we're going to be talking about meat and dairy outperforming alternatives earlier this year.
Hi, I'm Annabelle Twinbarrow, dairy analyst at the AHDB, here with a look at the domestic dairy market for the week commencing 7th of April. GB milk deliveries have shown year-on-year growth since September, following drier conditions and better milk prices. Deliveries for the month of March to date are up by 2.7% year-on-year, not including the last 2 days of the month. In the current milk year to date, milk deliveries are up by 0.7% versus the previous year. Milk price announcements were mixed in April, but the milk-to-feed price ratio still looks to be extremely favourable. The UK wholesale market was said to be relatively quiet in March, with some positive movement ahead of the flush. Average prices for bulk cream and SMP remain stable at £2,624 a tonne and £2,010 a tonne, respectively. Meanwhile, cheese and butter bounced upwards by 2% and 3% to stand at £4,020 a tonne and £6,070 a tonne, respectively. For the latest data and analysis on red meat, dairy and arable markets, head to ahdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
AHDB's Planting and Variety Survey delivers UK planted area estimates for the upcoming harvest each year. The results offer an early idea of what might be available for the upcoming UK cereals and oilseed rape harvest, and this year will reflect the impact of what was a challenging autumn for many. But we can only do this with your help. If you're a UK grower, please take a moment to complete the crop and variety form for Harvest 2025. You may have received the survey through the post, in which case please complete and return it by Monday the 12th of May. Alternatively, you can fill in a form online. Just go to ahdb.org.uk/PVS25 and ensure it's submitted by Friday the 16th of May. The survey is open now and the results will be available on the AHDB website from the 10th of June. Thank you for your input.
Welcome back to part 2 of Agronomics, and we spent the first part of this podcast talking about cooking trends and the shocking state of people's ability to cook in this country. How can they make any decent food in less than half an hour with 5 ingredients? Anyway, we're now going to be moving on to a different beat. And this is an area where I'm not an expert, so when the going gets tough, you go to someone that is an expert, and thankfully we have Hannah with me today to talk through this, which is around meat and dairy and their performance in the market compared to meat and dairy alternatives and how we saw it earlier this year. Hannah, we do see a period at the start of the year, the first month in the year, where it was very much focused upon alternative products away from meat and dairy. But we have seen less people sticking to a vegan diet through that January month recently, haven't we?
Yeah, we have seen less people wanting to become vegan for January, which is commonly called Veganuary. We have seen a declining engagement in Veganuary. We've seen this in the search term interest. So since 2020, half the amount of people have actually searched it. And we've also seen it being called Veganuary, which I think shows that it may have had its time. From our YouGov survey, we see that only a very small percentage of the population participate in veganuary. So, in statistics terms, only 2% of the population claim to be vegan, but only 1% are actually vegan. Going back to the health trends that I spoke about earlier, I think this has a part to play as people are turning away from the ultra-processed foods that I mentioned, and they have been going to meat and dairy instead as they are less processed and more natural.
So what did we see in that sort of performance then of the categories in that meat versus meat-free category through January?
Sales of meat-free products are decreasing, which has been the trend for the past 3 years. This was driven by a fall in vegetable-based products, so that would be your bean burgers, rather than meat imitation products, which is corn. In contrast to this, meat, fish and poultry saw volume growth of 1.4%, which is really positive.
That is positive. I'm going to whisper this, but I am partial to a spicy bean burger as an alternative. I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near a full vegan diet in the slightest, but I like a spicy bean burger. Having a balanced diet, there's nothing wrong with it at all. Anyway, that's the meat perspective, but what about dairy?
The same applies for dairy alternatives. Sales have decreased, and cow's dairy is now outperforming the plant-based equivalents in nearly all categories. Plant-based cheese has seen the largest decline in both spend and volume. Plant-based spreads are declining faster than cow's dairy, butter, spreads and margarines as they are more natural.
So this is all sounding like it's positive news from a sector basis and from a levy payer basis.
Yeah, I think this is really positive for levy payers as it shows consumers are still engaging with meat and dairy and seeing the health benefits more than they have been previously. I think the work that the marketing campaigns do as well of promoting the health benefits and suggesting recipes is really beneficial for this as well, as people can go to there to find the more convenient and healthy recipes that include red meat.
And I think that's a key thing that we've spoken about a number of times. And again, when we say we're talking about this consumer side of things, it is because it is from the demand orientation. We're looking at this from the demand side of the market to figure out what consumers are looking for and then the products that are put out there. And it is ever changing and still driven significantly by income. And it's interesting that you say that the meat-free and alternative product sector is reduced and is less interest in that sort of veganuary side since 2020, and whether that is again driven by the cost of living crisis that we've seen and the general economic downturn that we've had in recent years, because we saw something similar, well, almost 20 years ago now when we had the financial crash in 2008, that the organic sector was booming up until that point. And then obviously people were very conscious of incomes, moved away from organic products because they were more expensive to conventional products, if that's the right word. And we saw a change in the structure there. So again, income ultimately is the driver of all of this. And that comes back to, as you said, convenience and health being a key thing. Hannah, thank you for joining me today. That has been a fantastic tour de force through the world of food and consumers. And for those of you who were listening intently, you may have noticed that we sprinkled in a few song titles. And we were talking earlier about what's your favourite meat for a Sunday roast. And here's something that was probably equally as controversial in the mid-late 90s. Who is your favourite between Boyzone and Westlife? Because the song titles we had today, we had to choose a favourite, and it was Boyzone, who I do think would have been my favourite. Yeah, I'd go Boyzone.
Doing a podcast now.
I am indeed doing a podcast now, Alfred. Do you want to come and say hello to Hannah and Martin?
Hi!
Real father and son team there.
Hey!
Wow, that's a cool
We made a
helicopter.
helicopter last night, didn't we, mate? Yeah, this is good, this. Anyway, someone's at the front door, Alfred. Do you want to go and see who it is? Go on, take your helicopter as well, mate. You come and get it. Someone was at the front door.